I'm sitting in my studio. The mixing board, dark, except for the green glow of the monitors. My phone buzzes on the console, sharp against the wood. It's an alert from my bank's legal portal. A loan agreement is waiting for my review. My biological parents, Cynthia and Mark, are demanding I co-sign. 16 years after they divided my siblings like assets, my parents returned. Not for an apology, but for my signature. They don't know the girl they abandoned to. The state now understands contracts better than they ever will. Tonight, I am finally ready to say no. Have you ever been the one who was just left out? Let me know your story down in the comments. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. I was 15. I was sitting on my bedroom floor, my back pressed against the wood, trying to become invisible. In my lap, I held a small, cheap cassette player. I was listening to an old tape. The volume turned down so low, I had to press the foam headphone against my ear. It was a recording of me and my brother, Leo. He was 10, and I was trying to teach him a guitar chord. You could hear his high, clear voice get frustrated, then laugh. "No, you're doing it wrong," he said. And I laughed back. Then, we tried to sing a lullaby together. His voice was pure, and mine was, well, Mina. It was clumsy and amateur, but it was ours. It was the only recording I had of us. Just the two of us. I kept my finger on the pause button, my thumb rubbing the raised plastic dot. I was trying to use the sound of our voices to drown out the other sound. The sound from downstairs. The shouting had stopped about an hour ago. The shouting was familiar, almost comforting. It was just noise. But the silence that followed was terrifying. It was the calm, heavy silence of finality. It was the sound of division. Then, through the floor, I heard the voices. Not angry anymore. Calm. Measured. Like two accountants dividing office furniture. "I'll take Maya." It was my mother, Cynthia. Her voice was sharp, decisive. Maya was my sister. She was 12. She was the easy one, the pretty one. There was a pause. I heard the scrape of a chair on the kitchen tile. "Fine. My father, Mark." His voice was rough, coated in exhaustion. "Leo stays with me." Leo, my brother on the tape. He was 10. He was already good with his hands. Already useful. I held my breath. My hand stopped moving on the cassette player. I waited. I just waited. I waited for my name. Ilara. I waited for one of them to say. "And Ilara," or "What about Ilara?" The silence stretched. It pulled so thin, it felt like it was going to snap. I could hear the refrigerator humming downstairs. I could smell the faint, metallic scent of the old wiring in my walls. I waited so long that the silence itself became the answer. I was the line item left blank. I was the piece that didn't fit either set. I was the problem nobody wanted to solve. The realization didn't hit me like a wave. It was cold, like ice water being injected into my veins. I wasn't an asset to be fought over. I was a remainder. I looked down at the cassette player. My hand was shaking. I pressed the eject button. The little door popped open, and I took out the tape. The simple black plastic object, the sound of our voices, trapped on a thin, brown ribbon. This was the moment my life split in two. The moment I was left behind. The juvenile court was not a place for children. It was a place for files. The room smelled like old paper and the industrial floor polish they used to try and scrub away the misery. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sick, yellow glow on the dark wood benches. I wasn't Ilara. I was Case 749B. A judge. A woman who looked like she hadn't smiled in a decade. Read from a file. My file? She didn't look at me. "Pending placement?" she said. Her voice a monotone. "Temporary custody is granted to the state." My caseworker, Yenna, a woman with kind but tired eyes, put a hand on my shoulder. "It's time to go." "Ilara." I stood up. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. I looked for my mother. My father. They weren't there. They had already signed the papers. They had already left. As I followed Jenna out into the hallway, the strap of my backpack, the one holding my cassette player, snagged on the armrest of the bench. I was pulled back for a second. There was a sharp, terrible snap. I looked down. The cassette player had fallen out. The little door was open. The tape, my tape, with Leo's voice, was still inside. But the brown magnetic ribbon, the part that held the sound, had snagged on the metal hinge and snapped. A long, tangled loop of it was pulled out, crumpled and broken. All the sound, all the laughter, was just a useless piece of plastic ribbon on a dirty floor. Jenna gently unhooked it. "Oh, honey," she whispered. She tried to wind it back in, but it was too late. The break was clean. She handed me the broken tape, and I just held it in my palm, the symbol of my past, shattered. My first placement was a house run by a woman named Sharon. It wasn't a home. It was a museum of silence. Sharon's house was sterile. The carpets were a pale, spotless beige. The walls were white. There were no pictures. The air smelled like bleach and unscented dryer sheets. "We have rules here," Sharon said on the first day. Her voice was a dry whisper, as if even she was afraid of making too much noise. "We believe in quiet contemplation." The main rule was posted on the refrigerator, right above a chart for chores. No music. No loud noises. No disturbances. My broken cassette tape, which I kept in my pocket, felt like a bomb. The one piece of sound I had left was illegal in this house. I was given a bed in a small room I shared with 2 other girls who had also learned to be quiet. We moved like ghosts. We whispered. We learned to put our feet down heel to toe to make the floorboards creak less. We learned to close doors by turning the knob, clicking the latch softly into place, and then releasing. The silence was the point. It was an oppressive, heavy blanket. It wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of people who are terrified of taking up space. I would sit on my bed, holding the broken cassette, my fingers tracing the snapped ends of the ribbon. I was an object with no sound. Living in a house with no sound. I was case 749B. I was invisible, and the silence was the proof. I didn't last long at Sharon's. The silence and the beige walls started to blur together. One day, Jenna was back. Her car, waiting at the curb. "Not a good fit," she said, her voice neutral. As I got in, she didn't apologize. It was just a logistical fact. "I'm taking you somewhere else." We drove to a different part of the city, one where the houses were older and crowded together, covered in murals. We pulled up to a wide, slightly ramshackle house. Music, a loud, messy bass line was thumping from an open second-floor window. The front door was painted bright purple. A sign was nailed to it, hand-painted, the Echo Park Music Guild. Yana said, but she was smiling a little. "It's a lot," she warned me. "But it's not Kiet." The door was opened by a woman with a cloud of wild gray hair and a guitar pick earring. This was Rebecca. She was all warmth and motion, pulling me into a hug that smelled like coffee and patchouli. "You must be Alara. We've got a spot for you." "Samuel. She's here." The house was chaos. Instruments were everywhere. A violin case on the stairs. A keyboard on the dining room table. Kids were arguing, laughing, and practicing in 3 different rooms. It was the loudest place I had ever been. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. "What's that you've got?" Rebecca asked, pointing to my hand. I'd been clutching the broken cassette tape without even realizing it. The brown ribbon was sticking out. At Sharon's, I would have hidden it. I held it out, expecting her to take it away. To tell me it was against the rules? Rebecca just tilted her head. "Oh, that's a clean snap. That's fixable." She looked past me, her voice booming. "Samuel, get out here." A man emerged from the basement. He was the opposite of Rebecca. He was tall, dressed in a black t-shirt, and had the most serious, grumpy face I'd ever seen. This was Samuel. He was, I would learn, a professional sound engineer who had worked with everyone in the 90s. What he grumbled. "She's got a broken tape," Rebecca said. As if this was a normal introduction. Samuel looked at me, then at the cassette in my hand. He let out a long, suffering sigh. He motioned with his head. Bring it, he said, and turned back toward the basement. I followed him down into a room that changed my life. It was a real studio. The walls were covered in acoustic foam. A massive mixing console sat in the center. But on a small, clean workbench in the corner was what he called his repair station. I held out the tape. He didn't take it. The first thing you learn, he said, his voice a low rumble, is that you never throw away the master. Everything else is a copy. This is your master. You have to respect it. He showed me how to gently pull more of the ribbon out. He pointed to the break. You don't fix this with cheap plastic. You fix it right. He pulled out a small roll of what looked like silver foil. Splicing tape. He said, it's professional. It's precise. He showed me how to lay the two broken ends of the magnetic ribbon perfectly flat, side by side, on a small metal block. You don't overlap them, he said. You meet them exactly. You make the break as clean as possible. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, he cut a tiny, perfect piece of the silver tape and laid it over the seam. He pressed it down. He showed me how to wind the tape back into the cassette. The small silver patch gleaming under the single light. He put the cassette in an old player on his bench and pressed play. I heard the hiss. I heard my own laugh. I heard Leo's voice. No, you're doing it wrong. The sound was clear. It hadn't skipped. The break was still there. But the silver tape had bridged it. It was stronger. Samuel looked at me. That, he said, is the art of splicing. Now you know how to do it. Don't break it again. It was the first day of my new life. Years passed. My life was built. Not inherited. I am 31 years old. I am the adopted daughter of Rebecca and Samuel. The two people who didn't just give me a home. They gave me the tools to build my own. I took what Samuel taught me, the art of splicing, of healing the break, and I turned it into a career. I'm a professional sound engineer. But my real work, my life's work, is a nonprofit I founded called Spliced Stories. We use the Guild's resources to teach kids in the system, kids like I was, how to record, edit, and score their own lives, how to find their own voice in the silence. I was finally balanced. The past was an archive, a story I had spliced and put on a shelf. Then the ghosts returned. The first was my mother, Cynthia. She found me online. The email was hesitant, full of small talk I didn't recognize. Then came the call. Her voice was thin, nervous. She was on her third husband, she said. A man who had hit a patch of bad luck. The bad luck was gambling debts. $85,000 of it. He just needs a fresh start. Elara, she'd said, her voice turning familiar. Persuasive. The bank just needs a co-signer. Just a signature. For your mother. I told her I would have my lawyer review the terms. The silence on the other end of the line was cold. Days later, my father, Mark, appeared. He didn't call. He showed up at the Guild, unannounced, wearing a suit that was trying too hard. He smelled like cheap cologne and false confidence. He didn't ask about me. He didn't ask about my life. He'd seen an article about Splice Stories and the grants we had received. He pitched me. That's the only word for it. He had a new events company. He wanted to partner. He proposed that my nonprofit, Splice Stories, would subcontract his company to handle all our community showcases. He slid a piece of paper across the table in the Guild's kitchen. I read the proposal. It was a fraudulent contract designed to let him siphon $150,000 of our grant money into his pocket for consulting fees. It's a win-win, Elara, he said, smiling. Like we were strangers. Like we weren't. We keep the money in the family. 16 years of silence, and they both returned in the same week. Not for me, but for what I had. Not for a daughter, but for a co-signer. Not for a reunion, but for an asset. Tonight was the debut of my first audiovisual installation. It was a piece built from the ground up. A soundscape woven from hundreds of repaired, spliced, and remixed audio fragments from the Guild's archives. It was my story, told in sound. Before the doors opened, Samuel, My adoptive father, the gruff engineer who first taught me how to splice, was helping me check the final levels. He was quiet, but I could feel his pride. It was a tangible thing. He tapped a photo I had pinned to the wall. A picture of Mark, from the 90 seconds I'd found online. You know, he said, his voice a low rumble. I knew him. Back in the day? I turned. Stunned. What? Oh yeah. Mark. Your biological father. He said, testing the words. He was the most brilliant guitarist I'd ever seen. Absolutely brilliant. Had a record deal on the table. And he just threw it all away. Walked out on his band. On his career. On everything. I never understood it. Never understood a man who would just walk away from his own sound. He looked at me. His eyes sharp. Until now. He clapped me on the shoulder. Your sound is clean. Go on. Show 'em. The show was a blur. The installation was a success. People were moved. They were crying. They were coming up to me, grasping my hands, telling me they felt it. After the applause, one of the venue managers, looking stressed, touched my arm. Elara, there are some people waiting for you. In the green room. They said it was urgent. The warmth of the show vanished. I knew who it was. The urgent demands. The loan. The fraudulent contract. I walked down the concrete hallway. The echo of my own footsteps sounding too loud. I pushed open the heavy door. It was a setup. Apathetic. Desperat. Ambush. Cynthia and Mark were there. They weren't alone. They had brought their team. Cynthia had a nervous-looking man in a cheap suit. His briefcase open. Mark had the partner from his fake events company. They were trying to look like a professional delegation. They just looked like sharks. Elara. My father started. His voice full of that fake, booming confidence. Good show. Very artistic. Now, we just need to finalize this paperwork. My mother, Cynthia, pushed a stack of papers across the table. The $85,000 loan agreement. Mark slid his fraudulent $150,000 contract right next to it. A pen was placed neatly on top. We just need your signature, Cynthia said. Her voice a tight, demanding whine. On both. Let's get this done. Elara. I stood there, looking at the two demands. Two parasites. Trying to attach themselves to the life I had built. I didn't say anything. I just reached into my bag. I pulled out the cassette tape. The one I'd had since I was 15. The one with Leo's voice. The one that had snapped in the courthouse. The one Samuel had taught me to repair. The shining silver splicing tape. The professional tape that bridged the break. Gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. I held it for a beat. Then, I placed it directly on top of their contracts. What is this? Mark snapped. This, I said. My voice, quiet. But it cut through the room. This is my answer. Cynthia stared at it. Her face, a mask of brittle confidence. Just broke. All the performance. All the entitlement. Just shattered. No, she whispered. Her voice cracking. No. You don't understand. You have to. I did it for you. It was the last pathetic excuse. The one she'd been saving? I left you because you were the strong one, she cried. The tears finally coming. Maya. Leo. They needed me. They were fragile. But you were always so tough. You were strong. I knew you would be okay. I just looked at her. I felt the old ice water of the courthouse. That old silence. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was clarity. Strong. I repeated. I almost laughed. That is the word you use. The alibi. The story you tell yourself, so you can sleep. I stepped toward the table. I wasn't strong. I was a child. A child who learned to be quiet. A child who learned to be invisible, so I wouldn't be a problem. I pointed at her. You didn't leave me because I was strong. You left me because I was convenient to leave. You burdened me with your choice. That isn't strength. There's a word for that. It's called parentification. It's the sickness of a parent who forces their child to be the adult, to carry the emotional weight. They can't. You didn't leave me to save me. You abandoned me to save yourself. The silence in the green room was heavy, broken only by my mother's ragged breathing. My words, you abandoned me to save yourself, just hung in the air. Anunancerable. Final truth. The door opened. It wasn't a manager. It was Leo. My brother. The boy from the lullaby. Now a man I barely knew. With the same eyes I saw in the mirror. My mother, Cynthia, made a small, hopeful sound. A gasp. As if a new actor had just walked on stage to save her scene. My father, Mark, straightened up. A flicker of his old salesman confidence returning. Ready to claim his son. Leo didn't look at either of them. He walked past Mark's desperate, welcoming posture. He walked past Cynthia's outstretched hand. He walked straight to me. And he stood at my side. Shoulder to shoulder. He looked at our biological parents. And his face was just done. That was it. That was the final emotional checkmate. The one piece of the past they thought they still owned had just walked across the room and stood with the remainder. Mark, the brilliant guitarist who threw everything away, just deflated. He saw his son. He saw me. And he saw there was nothing left to leverage. He grabbed his fraudulent contracts from the table, his movements jerky and angry. And he walked out of the room. He didn't say goodbye. Cynthia stared. Her mouth open. She looked at me. Then at Leo. Then back at me. As if searching for one last button to push. One last string to pull. There were none. Just two adults, who were no longer her quiet, convenient children. She got up. Her movements stiff and old. And followed him out. The door clicked shut. And the silence that was left was, for the first time, peaceful. Later, I was alone in my studio. The lights were low. The hum of the equipment was the only sound. My sound. I was holding the cassette. The black plastic. The faded, handwritten label. And the small, shining piece of silver splicing tape that held the two broken ends of the ribbon together. The lullaby. The break. The repair. I looked at it for a long time. It wasn't a wound anymore. It wasn't a ghost. It was a document. A master recording of a life. I turned to my professional archive. The rows of shelves where I kept my work. I took a new, clean archival box. I placed the cassette inside. I printed a label. Elara. Lullaby. Master. I slid the box onto the shelf. Right between a restored symphony and a modern soundscape. It was filed. The break was healed. The past was no longer an emergency. It was just a part of the score. We are taught that blood is supposed to be unconditional. That family is a bond you can never, ever break. But I learned that some bonds aren't made of love. They're made of guilt. They're made of obligation. And holding on to a toxic tie isn't loyalty. It's just agreeing to be poisoned. Over and over. Choosing to let go. Choosing to say that final no isn't an act of revenge. It's not about hate. It's an act of liberation. It is the moment you stop letting their story define your future. It's the moment you finally let go of the blood they gave you. And find the person you were meant to be.